welcome to Big Talk Monday edition, college sports with a Midwest perspective, blue collar and blue blood. I'm Sam Sprunger, as I am always joined, Tony Hollinsworth. How are we, my friend?
Good. Happy St. Patty's Day or St. Patrick's Day, because
Aye.
some Irish folks get a little upset if you say Patty, because that's a little bit disrespectful. But hey, we're here. I'm at least wearing green. You're wearing golden pea, but that's fine. We'll work with it.
My eyes are green. Does that help?
I don't know. You're talking to a colorblind person. I don't know if they're green or not.
Technically,
I just know.
wear green all the time.
Oh,
because
are you wearing money?
My eyes.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you're wearing money. I didn't know you rolled like that.
I think my draws might have green on it too.
That's a health issue, sir.
No, it's not. So we were out on Friday.
Mm-hmm.
We are now back with a Big Ten tournament champion, and a big old thing called the NCAA bracket is now out. This is so exciting. This is the best time of the year when it comes to college basketball. I think, honestly, one of the best sporting event time frames, weekends that you can get is that opening weekend of the NCAA tournament, where you have games tipping off shortly afternoon on Thursday. They don't get done until like 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning on Friday. Then they kick back off shortly afternoon on Friday and go until like 1 or 2 in the morning on Saturday. Then they tip off again at 1 on Saturday and Sunday, and they go till around. It is wall to wall good basketball. I love this time of year.
Yep, all the way until really, technically it's the second week of April. So because the championship is on Monday the 7th. So we have basketball all the way from technically Thursday till April 7th. We have basketball.
Right, but when it gets to the Sweet 16 and on, each side only has 2 games. Per night.
So we do lose a little bit.
Wall to wall.
True, we do lose a little bit, but we still have basketball for at least till April.
Sure. Oh, for sure. And the Big Ten tournament wraps up. Tony, the Michigan Wolverines lost 3 straight going into the tournament. People were wondering, what's wrong with the Wolverines? Well, when the Big Ten tournament, nothing was wrong with them Wolverines.
I know they made me eat my words, because if you remember, you asked me.
I remember
halfway through the season, like, nah, I don't think they're legitimate.
They're gonna fall off.
Yeah, they're gonna fall. Iowa did the same exact thing. I was like, nah, Iowa's not gonna do it. Oh well, there's Iowa. No, I'm like, nah, Michigan's not gonna do it. Oh, Michigan, hello.
So if you're hearing Tony right, just go with opposite of what he says.
At least when it comes to not all the time. Not all the time. Just that's why I don't always do picks. I'm like, I don't always do great with those. I'm not trying to taint my reputation here. When it comes to picks, I'm out on picks.
But the one thing that they beat Purdue on Friday, beat them pretty soundly and handily. I'm going to look at that on the Boilermaker Lounge after this show, and if you're not akin to what's going on, Believe in Purdue has changed its name to the Boilermaker Lounge, part of the Lounge Sports Network, Boilermaker Lounge. So that will be following Big Talk here. We're going to talk about that in depth, but the biggest outcome there was Purdue couldn't hit a shot to save their lives. And I'm not saying that's the only. Michigan did a lot of good things, but if Purdue's hitting shots, that's not an 18-point game. That's more like a one-possession game. And you know what? Everybody runs into it. The one thing that I will say is a lot of people talked about Michigan. They lost 3 in a row. Oh my goodness, what are they going to do? Did they get hot too soon? Did they hit that? Are they going to be able to carry it from yesterday, Sunday night or evening, into they play on Thursday at 10 p.m. And so that's a can they hold that and play at that high of a level? And unfortunately, they play one of the 12 seeds that is really, really good, and it's in Denver. So UC San Diego, in its first year of eligibility to make the tournament, draws a 12 seed, draws Michigan, and oh wait, you get to go to Ball Arena though in Denver. closer to San Diego than
Yep.
it is Ann Arbor. Not
Yep.
saying that winning the Big Ten didn't do anything for Michigan in the tournament draw, but I don't think it did much for them.
Yeah, and it's funny too because not only are you a little skeptical, it sounds like from that, but the ESPN bet is too because guess what the spread is right now?
I had it pulled up actually a little bit ago. I don't know what the spread is, but
It's
I know the matchup predictor says Michigan's 66 over 33.
Yeah, the spread on ESPN bets is Michigan by -2.5.
So they're only they're only given 2 points.
Yeah. Now the open is 3.5, but yeah, the spread is 2.5, and so what does that say about how they feel with Michigan too? It's like, okay, again, they made a deep run in the Big Ten tournament, which it's funny too when you look at the Big Ten tournament of how that entire thing played out. Like you said on Friday, Purdue gets walloped pretty bad against Michigan, but we had even talked about that last Monday. How you had mentioned, Matt Painter and the Boilermakers are really not worried about the Big Ten tournament.
They're trying. They're
Are
not trying to lose, but yeah, you're right.
And for a lot of this was more of teams. Someone like Iowa needed this in order to keep their streak alive. IU really needed this to keep their streak alive. And
we'll talk about them down the road here.
Yeah, and
later.
And even teams, there's even a couple teams that got snubbed. There's a lot of angry fans in Morgantown because West Virginia got screwed out of potentially being in the tournament. But for the Big Ten tournament, you looked at Friday, 3 out of the 4 quote unquote home teams won in Michigan State, Maryland, and Michigan. The only one that lost was UCLA to Wisconsin. And it's funny because all of those were dominant wins by those teams. Then you come into Saturday, we have a 3-point game and a 1-point game decided. And then obviously yesterday,
last second shots on both of them too.
And obviously there's the one potential foul by Tanji.
It was all ball. If you watch that replay, it was all ball.
It was one of those, you watch it, I can kind of see both, but it was like, and at the end of the day, it doesn't hurt Michigan, and realistically, it doesn't hurt Wisconsin. It didn't hurt either teams, or Michigan State. I keep doing that.
Yeah, I'll correct for Dalton's sake. I will correct you every time.
I know you will. And then obviously Michigan gets the win over Maryland in a big way.
What a game!
That was a good game. That was a very good game. And then of course you have Michigan getting the win against Wisconsin. And that's the funny thing is none of those teams really needed it. Like all the teams that were really the final 8 teams didn't really need it. But
Friday there was no need for Thursday there were 3 teams that weren't going to make it.
Mm-hmm.
And then everybody else.
Yeah.
Well, we assumed. Let's say it this way: I assumed IU was in. They didn't need that win. That was me.
Right.
But yeah, none of the teams that played on Friday or Saturday needed that Big Ten championship. They wanted it. They didn't. Need it.
Right. And yeah, it is funny though because I have a buddy who's a West Virginia fan, and he is livid at the fact that North Carolina got in over West Virginia at least. So that it does go to show you that if you can make a semi-deep run in your conference tournament at times, it can help you. And I wonder too for Michigan at least to try to bring it back to the matchup that we think is probably going to be one of the most interesting for the Big Tens to start the NCAA tournament. Did Michigan do that to? I don't really want to say battle test themselves, but say we need to make a statement. We need to come into the NCAA tournament hot just to say, okay, we're somewhat legit. We're going to put up a fight when we're coming into this.
I don't know what they need to legitimize. I would say if they want to doubt us, go ahead,
Right.
Because but maybe that team doesn't work on being doubted very, I know of teams that say, "Oh, I hope that people doubt us because then when we come in and monkey stomp them, they're not gonna know what happened to them, and we're gonna say, look, we've been this good all year."
Right.
Things like that. I haven't doubted that Michigan is a good team.
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of in the same boat as you. I thought they were going to eventually lose some that they shouldn't have, and they did right at the end of the season.
Yeah.
That secured the 1 and 2 seeds for Michigan State and Maryland, respectively. But honestly, they if they would have lost those games sporadically throughout the year and still lost the same amount of games, I would have felt better about them. But anybody that loses 3 games in a row, Purdue lost 4 in a row, and I was worried about them. And I thought, okay, maybe we're not exactly where we need to be, or there are these concerns, and how realistic can they be fixed? Well,
Right.
Michigan kind of in that same boat going into the Big Ten tournament. They turn things around, and like I mentioned before, I worry for Michigan's sake. I don't worry for Michigan because I like them necessarily.
Right.
We know the feelings about the maize and blue, but I worry about Michigan of whether or not somebody. When I fill out a bracket, am I gonna have them lose to San Diego? Am I gonna have them get into the second round and lose to either Yale or Texas A&M? I don't know, because I just don't know what they've got in the did they use all of what they had to win that Big Ten tournament just to say, look at what we did?
I mean, maybe, and here's the other thing too. And I think you would probably be able to give a really good opinion on this. Neutrally, what do you say for Michigan fans? Because say you get bounced out of the tournament, is the season still a success because you completely turned around from what you were the year before, and you won the Big Ten tournament? So you're while you probably get bounced, I'm not going to say you potentially get bounced fairly early in the tournament, but you still technically ended, for the most part, your season on a pretty high note. Is it still a success for the Wolverines?
Sure it is, because, and I'll tell you why. We've talked about this on this show before with Dalton when he was still around. Matchups matter in the NCAA tournament.
Yep.
And you don't play games in the Big Ten according to matchups. You have a committee put these guys. You can't have a rematch. You can't have somebody. You can't have played whoever you're playing. You can't have played them before,
right,
in the season. It used to be until the second weekend you couldn't even play somebody from your conference. But now that we've got so many mega-sized conferences, we've got a couple of chances for, I believe, SEC teams to play each other in the second round. I think Florida, if Oklahoma beats UConn, they'll play Florida. That's an SEC game. Like, you couldn't play a conference. So these matchups, you get a team like UC San Diego, who probably has a bunch of experience together.
Yeah.
Right? They've played together for a couple of years. Maybe they've added some pieces in the portal, but still, for the most part, you probably have an older team.
Right.
Whereas Michigan comes in, they've got a portal team. Yes, they won the Big Ten tournament, but they also struggled at points. That matchup might not be good for Michigan.
Right.
And so if you see San Diego wins that game, I'm not going to say that Michigan's season was a bust. Was it disappointing how it ended? Sure. But they still went from last place and the dregs of last place in the Big Ten to win the tournament and finish third in the regular season. So, I think it's still a successful season by far. And Dusty May should be in consideration for National Coach of the Year.
Yeah. I mean, especially because of how, if you can take a program that was that down in the dumps, like you said, build it through the transfer portal, finish third in a conference, and, win your conference's tournament, that does say a lot about you as a coach and at least your players. Like you said, did they exhaust everything in their corner to potentially do that? We'll see as the tournament starts and how potentially far they go before we could probably make that justification or not. And then the question arises, do we judge Dusty a little bit? Like, did you really feel that you had to go all in to win the tournament? Because you were still going to be in the tournament no matter what. Like that was pretty much going to be a given.
I honestly think it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. Because
right.
you want to win the tournament because that means you don't lose.
Right.
So if you're a competitor and want to win and feel like you have to win, absolutely. I think that's first and foremost is you want to compete. You want to win every game that your team goes onto the court. But at the same time, and it's what I've said about Purdue is they want to win the games, but if they lose, they're not heartbroken.
Right.
And you can't tell your guys to, hey, hold back the emotion. Hey, if they get a groove going and they just absolutely have a bunch of emotion and they ride through much like Michigan did, you can't complain. Really,
right.
Honestly, I mean they didn't win the regular season championship, but they were in competition for it until the last week of the season.
Yep.
And for them to win the Big Ten tournament then says, oh, yeah, you had a successful season. What was it, 13 or were they 14-6 in the Big Ten, I believe is what it was.
I can tell you here in a second.
Yeah, I'd be able to tell you too. But so it's yeah, I think they have a successful season, even if they were to fall victim to the Tritons of UC
San Diego.
Well, let's take a look at the brackets a touch here.
Yeah, they were 14-6 in the Big Ten.
Okay. Well, let's take a look at the brackets. We're gonna skim through these somewhat, not quick, but a little bit faster pace than trying to break down each of these games. I'm not going to talk about the Purdue one yet because I'm talking about that on Wednesday on the Boilermaker Lounge. So I will talk about the matchup they have, but I'm not going to get in depth about it.
Right.
But you got Michigan and UC San Diego, and they're the only ones, I believe, in their – no, they're not the only ones in their bracket. Right there, Michigan State is the other one in the South bracket. The 2-seeded Spartans take on Bryant. Tony, I think that's a good matchup, whoever they end up playing in the second round. But I like that third round, that Sweet 16 battle against either Iowa. We're going to assume chalk when we go further into it unless we absolutely know of a team that we think is going to win and get into that second weekend. But we're looking at Ole Miss or Iowa State, two winnable games for Michigan State, Tom Izzo. I think they, just quick without even actually looking at the whole bracket, I think they're in the Elite Eight.
Yeah, I mean there's a lot of people just off of how well Tom Izzo did this year in the regular season and how he's done in the past. There's a lot of people even have them saying they're current betting favorites to enter into the Final Four. So I don't think Elite Eight is completely out of that picture. Like you said, the most interesting thing would be, is it Iowa State? Is it potentially Ole Miss? Like you said, just chalking up potentially, one of those two coming out of that to go on to face them, because Iowa State is really good. They did really well in the Big 12, and then Ole Miss also did really well in the SEC this year.
I honestly, the biggest threat to them losing prior to the Elite Eight, it's the second round. Marquette has a good point guard play. New Mexico is well-rounded. They're a good team. I'm not saying they will lose, but I think if to me, having watched Michigan State enough and having, I just think that their best chance of losing before the Elite Eight, in my mind, is that second round game. And then taking into consideration who the one seed is, I think Auburn's really good too. So I really think I could see a Michigan State Auburn matchup for that right to go to the Final Four.
Yeah, and funny enough, if they if they do face Marquette, again, barring any major upsets, that would actually be a revenge game for Marquette. Because if you remember last year in the tournament, Michigan State was able to get in and then they upset Marquette by winning. And so, who knows if Marquette maybe comes into this with a little bit of a revenge factor of, you guys knocked us out last year. We're going to try to do the same to you this year. Yeah.
2 years in a row, they beat Marquette.
Yeah.
Marquette was a 2 seed in Columbus 2 years ago. The same tournament that Purdue got beat by FDU. I was in Columbus covering that. And Michigan State was there. They beat USC in the first round. Marquette beat Vermont. And then Tom Izzo and the Spartans then proceeded to slap around Marquette and beat the 2 seed, because that was the same time that K-State went to the the Sweet 16 to play Michigan State at Madison Square Garden in New York City, and they played a classic game. It was the best game of the tournament that whole year, and K-State ended up beating Michigan State that night by, I think, 2 or 3. But that was this would be the third straight year they've matched up in a 2-7-10 matchup.
Sorry. So I'm doing the really bad thing if I'm looking up, because I had seen it earlier and I just want to confirm what it was. So for anybody who doesn't know who John Fanta is, he's apparently play-by-play announcer for Fox's college basketball.
He's got a good soda too.
Right. He's got a lot of bold predictions. I won't go through all of them, but these are some of the ones that I'm really, really confused at this. So he has UC San Diego upsetting Michigan, Yale upsetting Texas A&M, them facing off, UC San Diego winning that, and then going on to upset number 1 Auburn, to then have to take on Michigan State, who will have beaten Iowa State, and then Michigan State and Florida in the Final Four. The other really weird upset that you might be a little salty about, he has Purdue being upset by High Point, them losing to Clemson losing to Houston, and then Houston taking on Duke. And it should be I think he changed this, or somebody changed it, because it was supposed to be a Florida-Houston national title with Florida potentially winning the whole entire thing. But interesting upset predictions that he has to start things off, though.
Yeah, you know what? Trying to predict upsets are so frustrating, because the ones you think are absolutely going to happen don't, and then the ones that you don't have any idea that are going to happen all of a sudden jump out and bite you. The one thing I've got to say is I'm going off of 2019 Purdue's season. They limped into the NCAA tournament. They lost a couple, 2 or 3 out of 4 leading into the Big Ten tournament. Then they proceeded to get beat by a subpar team in the Big Ten tournament, their first game. And then they subsequently ran to the Elite 8 and should have made it to the Final Four, but got beat by Virginia in overtime. So, and then you think about 2023, Purdue goes in, Big Ten champion regular season, Big Ten champion tournament, and what happens? They get beat by FDU in the first round. Right. So I guess what I'm saying here is I saw some positives out of what happened in Indianapolis. Although Purdue struggled on Thursday against USC, I also went on the record saying USC was playing for their postseason lives. Purdue wasn't.
Right.
Not saying that they're not taking that game seriously, but there's not that sense of urgency that makes them play like their tournament lives or their postseason lives are on the line.
Right.
And I saw them get dismantled by Michigan, but both of those games I saw good play and output from the bench, which has really been something that we've been trying to figure out how it could get remedied, and they figured it out. I'm not saying check that off the list, that's no longer a concern, but they figured it out enough to where, you know what, their big 3 hits, that was the one thing against Michigan. Purdue couldn't hit a shot, and I already said that.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're not hitting a shot, you're not going to win many games. It doesn't matter how well you play defensively. Michigan didn't play great. They played well. They were hitting shots, and Purdue wasn't. So,
right.
So could Purdue lose to High Point? Sure. Matt Painter is the only coach ever to lose to a 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16 seed. He's the only one.
Poor guy.
But you know what? You know what that also says? Much of what I just said earlier is matchups matter in the tournament. Yes, they got beat by a 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16 seed, but guess what? That means they were good enough to have those high seeds.
Yep. And again, like you've said, like what even the other coaches and other players have even admitted in those games too. We got the one, but guarantee if we played them, 9 more times, they would probably win 9 out of 10 more times.
FDU's coach, Tobin Anderson, after they beat Purdue, was in the press conference and said, we play these guys 9 more times, we lose all 9.
Yep.
He admitted it. He said we had a plan. We played it. We executed it perfectly to what we were hoping to do.
Yep.
And we ended up winning.
Yep.
We play that 9 more times. We lose 9 times.
Yep.
So it just matters. It's when does that matchup happen? Do they match up well? Do they play into the higher seeds? And I say the higher seed meaning the lower seed, meaning the one closer to 16. Does the higher seed does the favorite play into their strong point? Then you know what? Then maybe there's an upset brewing. Really quickly, we've got only just a couple more minutes, but you've got Oregon as the 5 seed against Liberty. I'm kind of surprised that Oregon ended up as a 5 seed when they finished at number 8 in the conference. Wisconsin, a 3 seed, a really strong 3 seed in the East. I like their chances to. I think they advance. The one thing that will be interesting is BYU. If BYU beats VCU, that BYU team can put points on the board. But if you remember, when Wisconsin beat Purdue at Mackey, they scored 94 points and shot the lights out. When Purdue scored 84 and lost.
Yeah.
Not many times do you score 84 points and lose.
Yeah. And BYU played Iowa State here recently in order to move on to the Big 12 tournament. That was a really close and really good game. So
was that BYU's the double overtime game?
I think so, maybe. It was a very close game nonetheless, though. It was good. The only thing that I think I'm worried about Wisconsin is they might eventually have to play Alabama. For whatever reason, Alabama's become a basketball school now, and they're good.
Alabama.
Roll Tide.
Over in the Midwest, there are a trio of Big Ten teams. Purdue plays High Point, like you mentioned. The Panthers coming in, they're pretty good team that Purdue's going to have to remedy some things. But Illinois will play the winner of Texas Xavier in Milwaukee. That's an interesting game. I guess with the way that Illinois had been playing into the tournament, and then with their drubbing of Iowa in the Big Ten tournament, I thought maybe they'd move up a little bit, but evidently there wasn't enough room for them to move up. So Illinois is the 6th seed in the Midwest. Then you have the 7th seed, the UCLA Bruins take on Utah State in Lexington. Those 3 games are going to be fun to watch because I think all 3 of those teams could win, and all 3 of those teams could lose very easily as well.
Yes, very much so. Because I've heard some kind of risky things about Utah State before. Like you said, if it's Xavier or Texas, just historically with Xavier, I think it's possible. Texas kind of had an up and down season all this year. They had a pretty decent season, I think, 2 years ago, maybe even last year. So I mean, there's potential with that Texas team, and no offense, but like you said, with Purdue and it's a 13 seed, anything is possible. But of course, you can say that for any game throughout the whole entire bracket. But with Purdue, anything is possible.
Look at the last Big Ten team that we're going to talk about in the tournament, and we're going to run a little bit of overtime, and that's fine. Maryland, the 4 seed, Heartbreaking loss to Michigan, but you know what? They blew the doors off of Illinois.
Yes, they did.
They won by I believe it was 27 against Illinois, and it wasn't that close.
Yeah.
Period. And so I honestly could see Maryland making a little bit of a run. I don't know that they beat Florida, though. That's the only thing. Florida is, for all intents and purposes, the most well-rounded and most athletic team in this bracket, and it's going to be hard for Florida, for a team to beat. Not saying it's not possible. I'm just saying it's going to be hard.
Yeah. They're saying Oklahoma had a pretty good SEC tournament. They kept it close. I mean, Memphis historically has always been pretty good. I mean, has always been a tough
They
play.
are dealing with an injury in their starting lineup, though.
They are. And then, of course, you do, albeit they have definitely had a down year, you have the defending national champion UConn. You can't oversight them. So they probably have one of the toughest roads into potentially making it into even at least the Sweet 16, maybe the Elite 8 out of the Big Ten teams that are still there.
So let's talk about the last one that I really was thinking we would talk about. The Indiana Hoosiers did not make the NCAA tournament. How surprised are you by this? Because I was watching the selection show, and they actually said that, like, with the net and everything, IU was like 41 or 2, and North Carolina was like 54, and Xavier was like 50 or high 40s, like 48 or 9.
Yeah.
But IU's sitting here at like low 40s, I think, like 41, I think is what it was. And they're not even playing in an opening round game.
I'm going to be honest, I'm not really surprised, and I do wonder. And again,
what's the difference between them and North Carolina?
I don't know. I mean, again, I have the same question about West Virginia. I mean, North Carolina went 1-12 against quad 1 teams, and West Virginia has significantly more wins, and they're like, oh, North Carolina.
Well, I know Joe Lunardi and Mike DeCourcy both had IU and what was it? IU and West Virginia in, and no Xavier or North Carolina.
Yeah. Here's
what are they missing?
They say here's my theory, and again, I don't know how much validity there is to it. I wonder if they looked at a team like IU and said, you didn't make a deep run in your conference tournament. You stumbled throughout the entirety of your season. Your coach is already going to be gone. So realistically, what's the point if you stay in and potentially get an upset?
But what happens if they, I don't know, win? What if they pull a VCU back in the day, which is I believe they were an 11 seed, so that add that to Matt Painter's loss in double-digit seeds, because he lost to VC in the first round, who played into that game, and then VCU went to the Final Four.
I was going to say, if I remember right, they went to the Final Four. They went really far in the tournament.
Yeah, they got beat in the Final Four, but they went to the Final Four.
It's one of those. Well, you remember we talked about when we were talking about, the conference standings, as far as who do they give a win to? Do they do a coin flip? And I argued potentially record, overall, different stuff like that. And if you remember, I said there would never be a perfect way, because somebody's going to get the short end of the stick at the end of it. And I honestly,
it was Indiana State last year.
Yeah, it was ISU definitely last year. So I mean, realistically looking at it, I don't know what their justification for UNC and Xavier is over West Virginia and Indiana. I don't know if it's maybe a more historic relevancy over the past few years type of thing that they're trying to give them the grace of. Like, IU really hasn't done much. West Virginia has done. I don't know. I wouldn't even know where to begin with that.
When it comes to what's happened in the past, unless it's within the past 4 years, where some of those players that you're evaluating for this year's tournament were actually on it, I don't want to hear about what have you done historically, because it means jack.
Right.
And mind you, I'm a Purdue fan making this argument.
Right.
I do not think when it comes to, I believe North Carolina had I think they lost to They lost to Boston College, I think, which was a quad 3 loss.
I can tell you here in a second.
And they had some bad losses, not amount of losses. I'm saying who they lost to. There were a couple of really bad ones, and they were outside of quad 1.
Yeah.
IU, every single one of IU's games that they lost was in quad 1. They had a better record than North Carolina in quad 1. Quad 1 is where you should put most of your weight on whether or not a team makes it to the tournament. And IU, God, I hate saying this, but IU deserved it in my mind. If I were on the committee, I'd be screaming. How can you validate North Carolina over IU when here are the numbers?
So here's some of the big names that UCLA lost to. So they lost to Kansas.
UNC.
Or yeah. Who did I say?
UCLA.
UCLA. Oh, that's because that's the one big team that they beat. So sorry. UNC lost to Kansas. They lost to
Which
Auburn.
Is not a bad loss.
They lost to Auburn.
Definitely not a bad loss.
They lost to Michigan State. They lost to Alabama.
Yeah.
They lost to Florida.
Yeah.
They beat UCLA.
Yeah.
They went on a little bit of a streak there. They lost to Stanford.
Bad loss. That's the quad 3 loss. And it was at home against Stanford.
They lost to Wake Forest.
Not a great loss, but it's still quad 1, I believe.
They lost to Pitt.
Borderline second quad 2, I'm betting.
Then they lose to Duke.
That's a bad loss.
Well,
in their eyes, it is.
They lost 3 times to Duke this year.
Yes, they did.
They lost at Duke. They lost when they hosted Duke, and then they lost to Duke again.
Yep.
So I mean, you have one major win over UCLA, and
when you're hanging your hat on a UCLA game,
that's it. That's all you got.
I'm not damning Mick Cronin and the Bruins, not at all. They had a good season, but they shouldn't be your marquee.
Correct. And like you said,
I rest my case.
Oh yeah, believe me, I'm not denying it. Like I said, I am just as confused as everybody else is as to why IU isn't in, as to why West Virginia isn't in. Actually, I'm going to see if I can pull up real quick if my internet works with me what West Virginia's basketball schedule was.
Yeah, my big thing is I want the best teams in. And do I think IU's going to win the tournament? No.
Right.
But at the same time, could they win in Dayton, move on and win, a couple of games? Sure they could. They have the capability. They beat a Michigan State at the Breslin.
Yeah.
They dismantled a Purdue team that, while, yes, they had struggled, at one point was a top 10 team in the country, and deservedly so was a top 10 team in the country. So I think it's one of those that they absolutely are. They were on the outside looking in, undeservedly.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Oh, I hate my internet because my internet takes forever.
Well, unfortunately, you're in. Oh, you, of course, just as I was like,
just as it.
Let's wrap it up, but do it quickly.
I know. I will do my best. So West Virginia gets a big win over Gonzaga. That's big. They get a big win over Arizona. Big. They get a big win over Kansas. Big.
That's bigger than UCLA.
They lose to Houston. That's fair. They win against Iowa State. Big. They lose to Houston. And they lose to Texas Tech, and they lose to BYU. Those are big wins as compared to all of the losses.
Arizona's bigger than UCLA. No offense 100% to UCLA.
So is Iowa State. That's a massive win for them, and Kansas.
So some deficiencies. There's always going to be teams that are complaining, always. But I think, honestly, those two teams, both West Virginia and IU, have legitimate gripes, much like the atrocity of leaving the Sycamores out last year and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar not getting to play in the big dance. So, well, that brings us to the end of our tournament special. Tony, Why don't you tell everybody where they can find us?
You can find us on Facebook at Big Talk. That's B1G Talk. You can also find us on TikTok, Instagram, and X, all at B1G_Talk. You can find us on the All Sports All Plays Network, which you can get on any app store on any phone that you got at least twice a week. And Sam is nice enough. He will upload the podcast wherever you get your podcasts at. Thankful to the Lounge Sports Network, which is an umbrella under the Lounge Media Group. And there's no more believe. Do not believe anymore. No believe.
No, our relationship came to a close with Believe. We do appreciate the opportunity to be on the Believe Network.
For sure.
But we are moving forward as a Lounge Sports Network only show. But that brings us to the end of Big Talk on Monday. College sports with a Midwest perspective, blue collar and blue blood. We went some overtime, Tony, but that's okay. We had a lot to talk about. We'll be back on Friday to talk about some of the games on Thursday, and then also kind of talk about the tournament going forward, because some of it will have taken some shape by then. But for Tony Hollinsworth, I'm Sam Sprunger. We'll see you on Friday.